Night over New Mexico. A rancher finds something in the grass that doesn't belong to weather, wind, or fence wire. By morning, Roswell Army Airfield says it plainly. A flying disc was recovered. Hours later, the message flips. Photographs, foil, a tidy explanation that leaves untidy questions. What crashed in 1947? Who decided how the story should sound? And why did the most ordinary sky suddenly feel crowded? This is America Unexplained. Roswell, 1947.
July 1947. A quiet stretch of desert. A find in the grass that doesn't fit the weather, the wind, or the rancher's memory of ordinary things. By afternoon, Roswell Army Airfield puts it in print. A flying disc has been recovered. For one news cycle, the impossible is official. Then, snap, the story changes. Photographs, foil, and a neat explanation arrive faster than questions can line up. Roswell isn't only about what fell. It's about how stories are born, steered, and then argued with for generations. So here are our rules. First, paper before rumor. We read what was written that week, releases, cables, captions. Second, chain of custody. Who handled what, where did it go, and what was shown to cameras. Third, language counts. The difference between disc, balloon, and something the vocabulary of 1947 didn't quite have yet. Fourth, context matters. The early Cold War valued silence, compartmentalization, and plausible cover more than tidy public narratives. We are not here to close the case. We are here to keep the window open. Facts first, mystery intact. If an explanation can carry the weight, we'll show it. If it can't, we'll mark the gap without filling it with wishful thinking. How did a single headline become the longest-running mystery in American airspace? Rewind to day one, when the crash still belonged to the pasture and the paper.
If you like mysteries with receipts, subscribe. We'll follow the paperwork together. Tap the hype button below. It's free, only counts in the first 7 days, and helps push this episode up the hype leaderboard.
Fact check me in the comments, I can handle the cuffs.
If you want to support the investigation, grab the Roswell poster or an America Unexplained tee at the Timeless Tales shop, link in the description.
Chapter 1. The Crash That Wrote the Headlines.
Night breaks over the high desert. Wind in the grass. Wire fences ticking. A rancher, W. Mac Brazel, rides fence lines after a summer storm and finds a scatter of material that doesn't belong to weather, wind, or ranch chores. It is light. It is in pieces. It is wrong for anything he keeps in the barn. Days pass with the debris on his mind. He brings some in, shows neighbors, decides it's odd enough to tell the sheriff. Sheriff George Wilcox listens, weighs the story, and makes the call that changes the tempo. He contacts Roswell Army Airfield, home of the 509th Bomb Group. Military steps are practical and fast. Intelligence officer Major Jesse Marcel and a plain-spoken counterintelligence man, Sheridan Cavett, travel to the ranch. They walk the field. They crouch, lift, bend, test. The pieces feel stubborn for their weight. Some look like foil, some like sticks, some like fragments of a device. and none of it looks like airplane wreckage to men who know what airplane wreckage looks like. Chain of custody begins in the dirt. Gather, bag, load. A portion travels back toward town with Marcel. More is left for follow-up. The routine rhythms of a small post snap into a higher register. Phone calls. A public information officer on alert. Officers back and forth between offices that can make statements and offices that prefer not to. Then the line that still startles historians. Roswell Army Airfield tells the press it has recovered a flying disc. The language is matter of fact. The tone is official. Rumors, it says, are now reality. The material is in Army hands. In a single dispatch, the strange ranch field has a label, and the label has gravity. The newsroom reaction is immediate. The wire services move the item. Headlines crowd into evening editions. In the span of one news cycle, an impossibility sits on a front page with the calm posture of routine government news. Phones ring, editors reach for maps. Readers reach for a word they don't quite have yet. UFO is years away. The term of the moment is flying disc. Back on the ground, cameras wait for access that hasn't been granted. The base itself remains a filter. What gets shown on purpose. The idea that the U.S. Army Air Forces have picked up a disc is big enough to tug at other stories. Odd lights months earlier, radar blips that didn't cooperate, rumors about what the war taught engineers and what the peace is teaching spies. We pause on the paper trail. Who signed the release? Who approved the phrasing? What exactly did they think they had in those first hours? It matters because first language is rarely accidental. The plainness of the words, disc recovered, is either a simple mistake, a premature guess, or a straight report that would not age well by sundown. What we can say from the documents and the timeline is this. Material was found on the Foster Ranch. Civilians and military touched it. A statement was made that pointed away from weather and toward something extraordinary, and the country heard it. That is the moment Roswell becomes more than a local oddity. It becomes a national file, stamped with an official title before anyone has had time to write the index. Hold here. Freeze the frame on the headline. A base, a ranch, a sheriff, an intelligence officer, a pile of stubbornly light debris, and a sentence that lets the world use the word disc without irony. Everything that follows will either explain that sentence or explain it away.
If that's the routine paperwork, I can't wait to see what they file under, oops, bring the photographers. Chapter 2. From Disc to Balloon, the fastest U-turn in the West.
The headline is barely dry when the center of gravity shifts east. A selection of debris travels under orders, first to Roswell Army Airfield for handling, then onward to higher command. The next frames in the reel are not a pasture, but an office. Neutral carpet, maps on the wall, a general who understands that pictures can speak faster than corrections. Enter Fort Worth. Reporters and photographers are ushered in to see the material the public is now told caused all the commotion. Sticks, foil, balloon remnants, the ribs and facets of a radar target. Items that look as if a hardware store met a meteorology class. In front of the lenses, a general demonstrates with the calm of someone rapping a narrative. The flying disc is actually a weather balloon with a radar reflector. No mystery, just misidentification. The photographs do heavy lifting. They show officers kneeling, pointing, arranging, a pile of foil that catches flashbulbs like it was built for publicity, not physics. Labels follow fast, captions, wire copy, a new round of headlines now pushing against the old. If the first story lit a fuse, this one is designed like a fire break. What changed between morning and afternoon? The chain of custody is a timeline written in truck tires and phone calls. Intelligence officers handle the field collection. Senior command takes over the messaging. Once the story moves to Fort Worth, the center of decision-making is no longer the small base that first spoke plainly. It's a headquarters that speaks strategically. The language changes too. Yesterday's disk recovered becomes today's balloon identified. That swap is not only a label, it's a theory of the entire event. A balloon explanation implies a category error at every prior stage. The rancher mistook it. The sheriff escalated it. The intelligence officer didn't recognize it. And a public information officer misphrased it. Possible, yes. Convenient, also yes. Consider the mechanics of a photo op. Someone calls the press. Someone gathers prop pieces, arranges them where cameras can see, and says the right words with the right objects in frame. If you're correcting an honest mistake, you need clarity. If you're managing a classified edge case, you also need clarity, just of a different kind. Both scenarios use identical tools: pictures, captions, authority. Meanwhile, the public is whipsawed. Breakfast, discount. Dinner, balloon. The mind tries to reconcile two incompatible rooms. In one, a ranch field full of stubbornly lightweight material handled by men trained to know aircraft wreckage. In the other, a tidy demo of foil and sticks, taught to look harmless. The speed of the flip becomes part of the mystery. The neatness, too. We keep to paper and sequence. Orders are issued, the route changes, an office becomes a stage. The retraction lands with the certainty only a general can deliver. But it leaves questions scattered around the edges, like the debris it claims to explain. Why did the first release use the boldest possible word? Why did a correction require cameras instead of just cables? Why the haste? There's also the human factor. Careers dislike embarrassment. Commands dislike improvisation from below. If the first statement outpaced the facts, a public demonstration offers a decisive reset and a lesson to the ranks. Next time, call before you publish. If, on the other hand, the first hours touched something adjacent to classified work, then the correction performs two jobs: cooling the rumor and reheating the ordinary. Neither possibility excludes the other. The U-turn could be part error, part policy, and part the Cold War's preference for controlled narratives. What the photographs certainly do is shift burden of proof. The press, and then the public, must now defend the extraordinary against a convenient, familiar object placed neatly on an office rug. Freeze frame this chapter on a general pointing at foil while photographers scribble captions. It is the most documented moment in the Roswell timeline, and the most persuasive, if you take photographs as the finish line rather than another starting gun. Our rule remains: paper first, chain of custody always, language under a microscope. The balloon story is now the official story. But official and complete are cousins, not twins. Questions to carry forward. Did every person in the first 24 hours see only balloon parts and fail to recognize them? If not, what else? Materials, context, timing was present in those first decisions. And why did the narrative need the theater of a photo room?
If that's case closed, somebody forgot to close the box. Half the questions are still sticking out the lid. Chapter 3. Debris, Bodies, and Memory Wars.
If Chapter 2 is photographs and captions, Chapter 3 is voices, remembered, revised, rehearsed, and sometimes contradicted by paper. The debate that keeps Roswell alive doesn't just ask what was found. It asks who we believe and when their stories were told. Begin with the simplest divide: 1947 statements versus late 1970s and later recollections. In 1947, the language is cautious. A press release says disc, a general says balloon, and locals describe curious scraps: light, stubborn, foil-like, stick-like. The paper trail is thin but contemporary. It speaks in telegram brevity. Decades later, a new vocabulary arrives. Interviews, documentaries, and books collect memories sharpened by time and spotlight. Witnesses remember materials that wouldn't burn, crease, or break, symbols that looked like writing but weren't, crates in hangars, guards on doors. Some remember more than materials: rumors of bodies, sealed transport, small forms under sheets that did not move like patients. Memory is evidence, but it's a fragile kind. Psychologists have words for how it bends: telescoping, pushing distant events closer; contamination, mixing details from different sources; rehearsal, the way retelling cements edits; and demand characteristics, stories shaped unconsciously by what we think a listener wants. None of that makes a person dishonest. It makes them human. Still, when a recollection from 1980 corrects a telegram from 1947, we have to decide which kind of error is more likely. Take the unusual materials thread. Some witnesses described foil that remembered its shape: sticks that felt wrong for balsa, seams that looked manufactured but unfamiliar. Could a balloon array with radar targets produce a fair share of odd impressions in a windy field? Yes. Could something else, prototype components, lab-crafted films, or simply the strangeness of first contact with military hardware, also shape those impressions? Also yes. The closer we get to tactile language, wouldn't burn, snapped back smooth, the more the story leans on subjective thresholds. How hot was the test? How hard was the bend? What counts as normal foil in a rural 1947 toolkit? Then come the bodies narratives. These don't stamp the paperwork until much later. Accounts surface of child-sized forms, unusual stretchers, tight security, and a hospital that behaved like a secret had a pulse. Names enter and exit the file: morticians, nurses, airmen with memories of orders that didn't fit routine, sealed coffins, special chemicals, warnings not to talk. Here the timeline becomes a field of fault lines. Were the bodies seen in 1947, or are later tests and accidents bleeding into the frame? Did Cold War programs, parachute trials with anthropomorphic dummies in the 1950s, high-altitude mishaps, medical transports, plant later visuals into earlier stories? A plausible overlay doesn't erase the claim, but it does ask the historian's question: why do bodies grow more vivid as the decades lengthen?
Chain of custody returns as our compass. We can map debris from ranch to base to photo room. We can only sketch rumors about remains. No 1947 document we can point to with a finger uses the language of biological recovery. That absence doesn't disprove, it limits what we can responsibly say on camera, without borrowing certainty from rumor. A separate memory war plays out over who said what when. An intelligence officer speaks out in the late 1970s, saying the balloon was a cover. Colleagues disagree on detail and tone. Authors gather interviews, separated by years and telephone lines. Contradictions are edited into arcs that feel coherent. Every retelling wins followers and enemies, as if Roswell needed defense attorneys more than historians. There's also a geographical effect. A story whispered around Roswell in 1947 had few places to echo. A TV documentary in 1987 has 1,000. Once a claim becomes famous, new witnesses may realize their quiet memory now has an audience. Some step forward, some misremember, a few invent. Distinguishing among those categories without courtrooms and subpoenas is part science, part art, and a lot of humility. So we set working rules for this chapter's pile of testimony. Give weight to statements nearest the event, but not blindly. People can be wrong in real time. Treat later recollections as leads, not verdicts. Prefer particulars over vibes. Measurements, handling steps. Who signed what copy of which form. Mark contradictions and let them stand. Sometimes that's the truest map we can draw. What survives this filter from the combined accounts? A debris field with light, stubborn materials. A fast escalation from sheriff to base. A first-day official use of the word disc. A theatrical, same-day correction in another city. And a widening ring of human stories, some likely true, some likely blended, a few impossible to square with paper, about guards, crates, and forms lighter than they should have been. If the bodies exist only in later memory, the question becomes, why did that image attach itself so tightly to Roswell? Because a machine with no pilot is less dramatic than a crash with passengers. Because the Cold War trained citizens to sense secrets behind doors. Because, perhaps, other incidents, separate in time and place, needed an organizing myth, and Roswell had the headline ready. We won't fix memory with a monologue. We can, however, keep the categories clear. What was written then, what was said later, and what the human mind does to connect the two. In this series, the unexplained is not a vacuum to be filled. It's a perimeter to be respected. Freeze frame here on a page split down the middle. On one side, clippings and teletype. On the other, transcripts and taped interviews. Between them runs the thin wire we'll try not to cut. The possibility that ordinary hardware wore extraordinary timing. Or that extraordinary hardware wore an ordinary costume.
If memories had fingerprints, half our suspects would be smudges, and the other half would be wearing tiny gloves. Chapter 4. Projects, Cover, and Why Roswell Won't Die.
If the first three chapters are about a headline and its whiplash, this one is about the room behind the curtain, the Cold War habit of building secrets first and narratives second. Start with the kind of work America was starting in 1947. Engineers and physicists were learning to listen to a planet that had just entered the nuclear age. High-altitude balloon trains, long strings of gas cells and instruments designed to ride a level layer of air, were being tested across the Southwest. The idea, a balloon that could travel far, steady, and quiet enough to catch faint signatures in the sky, acoustic waves, radio whispers, that might betray a distant test or launch. Those balloons needed to be found and tracked. Enter radar reflectors, lightweight, foil-faced targets with geometric ribs that made a balloon's position visible to ground radar. They looked like a craft project until you needed them. Then they were the point at which theoretical physics met please don't lose the payload. None of this was built for public understanding. Most of it wasn't built for public anything. Now put that behind a wall labeled compartmentalized. The Cold War didn't just prefer secrecy, it lived on it. Projects were sliced into need-to-know compartments. A technician might know how to assemble a reflector and never be told what the instrument package was hunting. A base public information officer might know the words he can say on a normal day and have no clearance for the abnormal one. In such a room, plausible explanations aren't just convenient, they're policy. This is where the why of Roswell's U-turn lives. If a classified test scattered odd-looking hardware on a ranch, the first responders could have been exactly what they appeared to be: local military dealing with local debris. The second responders The ones with access to classification markings and program managers would then do what the Cold War trained them to do: swap vocabulary, stage a demonstration, cool the rumor. Weather remains the most polite word in a lexicon of covers, and balloon is a label that explains almost anything floaty from 50 feet away. Does a balloon program explain everything? Not quite. It can explain foil, sticks, reflectors, and a reason to tidy up fast. It can explain why a correction needed to be so theatrical, reset the narrative once, publicly, and discourage improvisation by subordinates. But timing and tone still ask for attention. If classification drove the correction, why was the first release so bold? Did a public information office outrun its leash? Did an intelligence officer speak too plainly before a phone upstairs rang? Those are process questions with human answers, not alien ones, and they matter. Then there's the long tail. As the 1950s and early 1960s unfurl, balloon programs multiply and specialize. Some carry cameras or test dummies to study high-altitude ejection. Others stretch for days, mapping winds. Each program generates its own field notes, mishaps, recoveries, and rumors. Decades later, when memories try to stitch a single story from many threads, scenes from different years can bleed together. A 1950s dummy drop can migrate into a 1947 crash in the mine's editing bay. The map is complicated enough that even honest recollection can misplace a pin.
So why won't Roswell die? Partly because it has the perfect skeleton for a lasting legend. A first-day official phrase, flying disc, that feels like a confession. A same-day pivot that feels like choreography. Artifacts that look familiar enough to be dismissed and odd enough to be argued over. A Cold War setting where silence was standard and paperwork traveled in locked bags. And later, testimony that expands the cast and raises the stakes. Legends don't need absolute proof. They need a rhythm the public can remember. Roswell has it. Every retelling becomes a referendum on which line you underline: disc or balloon, pasture or photo room, paper or memory. The more we argue, the more the case keeps a pulse. What do we do with that pulse in a series called America Unexplained? We keep the rules we promised. Paper first, chain of custody mapped where possible, language inspected. We allow declassified programs to carry the weight they can, without letting them carry more than they should. A balloon array can account for hardware. It can't, by itself, explain why a local base issued a headline that felt like the future. Human error can explain the headline. It can't, by itself, explain the speed and staging of the correction. Between those two realities is the narrow space where mysteries live. Not as gaps to be stuffed with wishful thinking, but as rooms to be left lit while we keep reading.
So, we end Roswell the way we began it, with the discipline to separate what the documents say from what we want them to say, and with the curiosity to admit the remainder, the sliver that keeps the map interesting. The desert doesn't tell stories on our schedule. Neither does a bureaucracy designed to talk only when it must. Carry this forward. Some secrets are about hardware. Others are about habits. Roswell, uniquely, might be both. The hardware had reasons to be in the sky. The habit had reasons to change the subject. Freeze frame on the two images that refuse to merge. A headline that says disc and a photograph that says balloon. Between them runs the country's longest hallway, the one where security meets storytelling.
If the truth's in that hallway, I'll bring snacks. Those briefings can be longer than the runway.
Tap Join to support the series and unlock early chapter drops, members-only posts, and our research notes.
If the gap bothers you, help me measure it. Share this with a friend who bookmarks anomalies.
If this helped you think straighter about Roswell, like the video and subscribe. Damn you. Next, we open the Pentagon's UAP files.
Night returns to the high plains, and the wind goes back to moving only grass. Somewhere between a headline that said "disc" and a photograph that said "balloon," the file kept breathing. That space, the whole way between certainty and convenience, is where Roswell still lives. We've walked it with the rules we promised: paper first, chain of custody wherever it can be traced, language under a microscope. We've let memory testify without letting it deliver the verdict. Cold War habits explained some things cleanly and left others just out of reach. Timing, tone, and a press release that felt like tomorrow calling from the wrong decade. If there's a lesson here, it's not that mysteries demand belief. It's that they deserve discipline. When you can't close the file, sharpen the questions. When a correction feels theatrical, ask who built the stage. When two images refuse to merge, measure the gap before you start filling it. So we leave the gate the way we found it, patiently. The pasture is quiet, the paperwork is not. And until one of them tells the whole story, we'll keep the window open. Facts first, mystery intact. We see us in Washington, D.C., inside the Pentagon's UAP files.